Hey, loves. So, just wanted to talk about something that is kind of in our subconscious when we think about our relationship with Yahweh, but wanted to kind of bring it to the forefront because it is actually something that we need to be consciously aware of at all times in our walk with Him, and that is the levels of Him. And not just the levels of Him, but the levels that we actually progress through, or we should be progressing through at least, when we are walking with Him. And the thing about it is, your progression through these levels is likened unto your experience in your natural born life. We start off as children, we grow into adolescence, then teenagers, and then adults. And even once we hit adulthood, there's different milestones that we reach that marks a different mentality, or something usually changes within us at these milestones. But in our walk with Yahweh, although the stages are similar, the way you progress through these stages is not the same experience as your progression in your physical age. Your progression in your walk with Yahweh is dependent on your thirst. Some people can remain a babe for 30 years and some for only 3. It's just dependent on your thirst. Okay, let's get into it. So when you think about your relationship with Yahweh, the God of everything, a lot of times we just kind of think of us as we are in our physical age, and then Him and us being in a relationship with Him. So for instance, I'm 38, so a lot of times we tend to think of a 38-year-old in relationship with the God of the universe, Yahweh. The problem with that is physically I'm 38, but that doesn't necessarily mean that spiritually I'm 38. And this concept actually transfers over into our mental and emotional state. As a matter of fact, there's something in psychology called the emotional quotient, which is similar to your IQ, your intellectual quotient. And it really, instead of it assessing your mental intellect, I guess you can say, it assesses your emotional maturity. Because there are some people, as we all have probably come across a few of them, that are well into their 60s and 70s that have an EQ of a 10-year-old. And it's not necessarily their fault. I mean, a lot of it has to do with usually when you have a stunt in growth in your EQ, is because you experience something traumatic at the age that your EQ is. So again, in that same example, a 67-year-old that has an EQ of a 10-year-old, something happened to them when they were 10 years old that stunted their emotional growth. And now, even though physically they've continued to progress in age, emotionally they have remained that 10-year-old. And more than likely they'll stay that same way unless they seek help. And even though I am a child of Yahweh, I'm not against counseling and therapy. Sometimes it really does help. So, any form of help, whether it be Yahweh regulating their mind or them seeking counseling and therapy, if they don't do any of those things, they will remain that 10-year-old trapped inside of a 67-year-old body, and then eventually a 68-year-old body and a 69-year-old body, until they're physically removed from this earth. So I just wanted to briefly look into some of the different stages or levels, and please understand that this is just a rough draft of what they could possibly look like. I'm not saying that these are the full extent of the stages. I'm definitely not saying that the descriptions that I'm going to say is the full description. I mean, I'm sure that someone else listening might think of something else that can go in here. Ruach HaKodesh might speak to you and say, hey, this, that, and the other. This is just an outline, basically. So we kind of all start off as babes. When you think about a babe, especially an infant, a newborn infant, when they're first born, they can't speak, they can't walk, they can't talk. The only thing they know how to do to somewhat communicate what they want is to cry. So when they're sleepy, they cry. When they're hungry, they cry. When they're wet, they cry. And you get the point. And as a parent, because you know that they are totally dependent on you, you don't really get mad. I mean, you might get irritated because you're not getting any sleep, but you don't really get mad at the fact that they're crying all the time, because you understand that is the only way they know how to communicate with you. And you just, if you're a good parent, you just take care of their need and you keep it moving, no thought to it. So from the perspective of the babe, everything seems pretty easy. You just cry a little bit and people come running. You have this innocence about you because you haven't learned about the different evils or even the good things in the world. Everything is just kind of neutral to you. So you have this innocence and this awe for creation. Like you have this fascination with everything because everything is new to you. And when you think about a babe in Mashiach, they have an adoration for Yahweh because, usually in that stage is when he is showing you his might. So just like with a newborn infant, everything is easy in that stage because he has to build that trust. So when he starts taking you through the maturation process, you have a foundation on which to gauge who he is. That's where we start saying, if he did it before, he could do it again. That's where that has to come into play, because the older you get in your walk with him spiritually, the less easy it is and the more you have to exercise your faith muscle. Okay, so when you think about when a newborn starts to mature, the first thing they have are growing pains. That's their bones growing, that's their skin stretching. They start to learn how to walk, they start to learn how to talk, they start teething. All of these things are painful. And spiritually, it's taking you from the milk stage to the meat stage, especially when you think about the teething. You can't eat meat with no teeth. I mean, I guess you could if you put it in a blender and blended it up, but I mean, most people aren't going to do that. So when you think about eating meat, you usually have teeth, but your teeth have to come in. And even once your teeth come in, around like 5 to 7 years old, most children start to lose their baby teeth, and then they go through another stage of teething where their adult teeth come in. So they still have, the little crankiness, the ornery aspect to them. So when you start to mature, that's when things start to get a little bit harder. It seems like Yahweh's not answering as quickly, or it's not as easy for things to come to you because, he's gradually starting to take those training wheels off. And then you go through this period where you briefly lose your identity. It's a crisis because you're so used to him always being there and answering right away, and everything's just so easy. And now you're at this place where it's taking him longer to answer, and it seems like he's farther away, and you have to run to him this time, and you have to seek him out instead of him just being there. You just cry and he just shows up. So now there's this crisis going on inside of you, and your mind starts flirting with the idea of intentionally sinning. That doubt starts coming up. Sometimes it's not even doubt in him. Sometimes it's doubt that you are walking with him, that you ever were walking with him. Like, it starts to come up in your mind, and it starts to invade your thoughts, because on the one hand, do I press through this, or do I just walk away? Like, what do I do? And we've all been there. And when I think about my son, my son has these spurts of growth. And one thing I noticed when he's going through a growth spurt is his appetite enhances. And I'm sure it has something to do with him needing more nutrients to supplement the growth that's going on. I don't know. I'm not a biologist. I can't really break it down the way someone who is in that field would, but I'm pretty sure that the two go hand in hand with each other. So for a lot of us, this is where we kind of fall apart, because spiritually, when we start to go through that growth period, our spirit needs more nourishment. So this is usually the time where we're supposed to be spending more time with Abba, reading his word, praise and worship, prayer. But a lot of us tend to kind of rely on what we did in the past, and that's where we kind of burn out, or we become stagnant, because we lose our seek, But if you can make it past that first initial stage where he starts to take them training wheels off, then you kind of hit puberty. You made it through this growth spurt. Your baby teeth have come in. You're smelling yourself now. Like, you're kind of taking his glory and thinking, okay, well, I got this. And there's this false confidence that a lot of us go through. And in a way, we kind of become a little bit rebellious or defiant towards him, and act like we know it all because, I got through this. That wasn't nothing. This is easy. And then we start to get a little bit ahead of Yahweh, grabbing the steering wheel away from him. When we start to go through puberty, that's usually right before we hit our latter teen years. And that's around the time where we start to get our learner's permit and we learn how to drive. And just imagine a teenager that has their learner's permit and they're in the car with their parent who's trying to teach them how to drive. I don't know about you, but I tried to mock some of the behaviors I would see my parents doing when I would ride in the passenger seat, and I would get fussed at because, certain postures and having one hand on the steering wheel and looking around and all that other stuff, that's something that someone who is experienced in driving can do easily without causing an accident. And even then, they still have accidents. So someone that is just now learning how to drive should probably keep their hands on the 10 and the 2, their eyes straight ahead, not be playing with the radio and all this other stuff, and just drive. But when we hit that puberty stage, we act like we know it all, and we start to tell God stuff. We start to tell him what to do and tell him what we need, and we get to this place where we think that we are God with the little g, not realizing that we still need him the same way we did when we were a babe. And that brings us into adulthood. There's something humbling about when you reach adulthood spiritually, because that's when you start to realize that, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to get through this. Like, you become very humble. And for a lot of us, it's because we don't went through some stuff, and Yahweh had to sit us down, and we're like, oh yeah. And he's currently in the process of fixing some mess we done got ourselves into. And now we're a little bit more humble. That rebellion has fleed. And for me, like when I hit adulthood, especially when I became a parent myself, and I would say things to my son, and it would sound like something my parents would say to me, it's when I started realizing that my parents were right. I mean, it happened before I became a parent. You know, just different things in life would occur, and I would have that brief moment where I'm like, wow, you know, mama told me such and such, or daddy told me such and such, and I didn't listen. You know, same thing spiritually when it comes to Yahweh. You know, he tells us something, and sometimes we just, I'm gonna find out for myself, and we go out there and we get our butts handed to us. That means no better way of putting it. We get our butts handed to us, and then we come crawling back to him, begging him to fix it. And in true repentance, he does go and he fixes it. I mean, sometimes he still allows us to suffer the consequences of whatever it was that we did, but he still goes and he fixes it and he makes things new. And with that newfound humility, we start to settle into our obedience to him, meaning we're quicker to say, okay, you got it, whatever you want. Because we don't learn our lesson. I mean, if you're smart, you learned your lesson, and you won't do that again. You won't try to take the steering wheel from him again. And you also have a newfound appreciation for him, knowing that the things that he told you wasn't because he just wants you to have this boring, uptight life. It's because he knows those things that will try to attack you or entice you and pull you away from him, the things that will separate you for all eternity from him. And because he wants to spend eternity, he chooses to spend eternity with us. He warns us ahead of time, multiple times. One of the things I love about Yahweh is he doesn't just say things once. Even in his written word, in his logos, he tends to repeat certain things. Whenever you see something repeated, it's usually 3 times that he says it. Whenever you see something that's repeated 3 times, there's an emphasis on that. Like, he really wants you to hone in and be like, yo, pay attention to this right here. He's constantly teaching. He's constantly growing and grooming and molding and shaping. When I was studying the book of Vayikra, that's Leviticus, the first part of the book, starting in chapter 1, going to like chapter 6, I want to say, it talks about the different sacrifices. And one of the things that I saw was consistent in the animalistic sacrifices was that when they cut the fat off, it said that the fat portion was Yahweh's portion. And I heard Ruach HaKodesh say the fat portion is the portion that is useless. So we hand it to him, because after all, we know that he's not actually coming from heaven and eating on the animal, you know. They cut the fat off. So then when you start thinking about when Paul said we're supposed to present our bodies as a living sacrifice, those things in us that are not like him, we're supposed to hand those over to him and place them at his feet, or we can say it on his altar, however you want to look at it. That is the fat portions, the portions that we don't need, the unhealthy portions. And we give it to him. We give those portions to him. So our sins, our temptations, our sinful desires, all of those things are the fat portions that he cuts away from us, and we're supposed to hand it over to him. That's his portion. And then in return, he gives us his nature. He gives us his authority. He regulates our minds, our hearts, our emotions, our spirits. But yeah, we're supposed to hand those things over. So yeah, there's levels to this thing. And I'm sure I'm not getting all the levels, but this is just what Ruach HaKodesh was speaking to me in regards to this. And I think it's very beautiful because as he was speaking this to me, it really painted the picture of him as my father. You know, not that I didn't know he was my father, but when you really set your mind on these analogies in this way, and you can really see how he is a loving parent, even down to his chastisement. Is when I'm when I'm fussing at my son, one of the things that I try to tell him is you have to learn this now. Because when you leave out of my house and you go out into the real world, the world is not going to be kind to you. So you got to learn whatever it is that I'm trying to teach him at the moment. You got to learn this now. And that's how Yahweh is. You got to learn this now. I'm trying to teach you because same aspect. I'm sending you out as lambs among wolves. Remember, Yeshua said that to his Talmudim. It's the same thing. He knows that these wolves are going to try to tear us apart. So he wants us to learn these things. And there's nothing wrong with going through the puberty stage, just smelling yourself, being defiant, rebellious, and know-it-all, as long as you continue to seek him out with all of your might so that you can make it to the adulthood, because the puberty stage is what kills a lot of people spiritually. So we're just going to pray that Abba continues to increase our thirst for him and draw us in closer to him and reveal more of himself to us, and just for him to give us a heart of flesh in exchange for our heart of stone, so that we will be more sensitive to his commands, so that we don't perish and that his will be done here on earth as it is in heaven. All right. Well, that's all I got for tonight, you guys. I love you as always, and until next time.